I am Sasha, 25 years old, and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. 5 years ago, they threw me out into a freezing winter night because I was pregnant and refused to hide my shame. As a successful venture capital executive, I escaped their toxicity and built my own empire. Last Sunday, the massive iron gates of my estate chimed. Standing at my front door were the two people who vowed never to look at me again. My parents. They took one look at my comfortable clothes and immediately assumed I was the hired help. "Hide that child of yours before the owner gets here," my mother hissed. I simply smiled and leaned against the doorframe. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The morning had started beautifully in my Buckhead mansion. The Georgia sun was pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my living room, casting warm golden light across the marble floors. I was wearing my favorite oversized cashmere sweater and simple leggings, enjoying the rare peace of a Sunday morning. My 5-year-old son Leo was sitting on the plush rug, building a massive tower. His laughter filled the space, echoing off the high ceilings, making my heart swell with pride. I had fought hard to give him this life. I was sipping my coffee when the heavy brass doorbell echoed through the foyer. I was not expecting visitors. My brother Trey and his wife Claire were staying over for the weekend, but they were currently out. I set my mug down and walked toward the grand entryway. When I glanced at the security monitor mounted on the wall, my blood ran cold. Standing on my pristine front porch were Vernon and Brenda, my father and my mother. It had been 5 years since I last saw their faces. They looked exactly the same. My father was wearing his tailored Sunday suit, the one he always wore to project power to his church congregation. My mother was clutching a designer handbag, standing with that familiar rigid posture that screamed superiority. They were the perfect picture of Atlanta high society, holding their heads high with unearned entitlement. I took a deep breath and pulled the door open. The moment the door swung wide, my mother stepped back in sheer shock. Her eyes scanned my face, and then raked over my casual clothes. The look of surprise morphed into a familiar mask of disgust. She did not see her daughter who had survived and thrived. She saw the girl she had discarded. Looking at my plain clothes and messy bun, her mind jumped to the only conclusion that made sense in her elitist worldview. "Sasha, what on earth are you doing here?" My mother snapped, her voice cutting through the peaceful morning air. "Have you sunk so low that you are scrubbing floors in Buckhead now?" I stood completely frozen, absorbing the sheer audacity of her words. She really thought I was the maid. "Move out of the way, girl," my father barked, stepping forward and trying to look past me into the foyer. "We do not have time for your nonsense today. We have a very important meeting with the chief executive of the venture capital firm that owns this property. We are here to secure a $5 million funding package for the church and for your brother-in-law's political campaign. Do not ruin this for us." I crossed my arms, finding my voice. "You are here to see the owner of the house." "Yes," my mother said, waving her hand dismissively. "Now be a good girl and go fetch whoever is in charge. Tell them Vernon and Brenda are here for our 10 o'clock appointment. And wipe that look off your face. You are making a terrible impression." Suddenly I heard the soft patter of little feet racing across the marble floor. "Mommy, look at my tower!" Leo cheered, running up behind me and grabbing the fabric of my leggings. My father's eyes darted down to the little boy clinging to my leg. The veins in his neck instantly bulged, and his face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. "Is that the child?" my father demanded, pointing a shaking finger at my sweet boy. "Are you telling me you bring that bastard child with you to your housekeeping jobs? Have you completely lost your mind, Sasha?" My mother gasped, placing a hand over her chest. "Sasha, this is entirely inappropriate," she hissed, leaning closer so her harsh whisper would not carry. "You are going to get yourself fired. The owner of an estate like this does not want the hired help bringing their illegitimate mistakes into a multi-million-dollar home. Grab him and go hide in the kitchen right now. Get out of sight before the boss comes downstairs and sees this mess." I placed a protective hand on Leo's head, gently stroking his hair. He looked up at these two angry strangers, completely unaware that they shared his blood. They were looking at their own grandson like he was a piece of trash. "He is not a mistake," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady tone that I usually reserved for hostile boardroom negotiations. "And I am not going to hide him anywhere." "You stubborn, ungrateful girl," my father growled, taking half a step toward me. "You have always been a stain on this family. You ruined your life, and now you are trying to humiliate us in front of the most important investor in Atlanta. I will not allow it. I will speak to your employer myself and have you removed from these premises if you do not take that boy and vanish this instant." I did not move an inch. I stood my ground, looking directly into the eyes of the people who had abandoned me. "Nobody is going to throw me out," I said. My father scoffed loudly. "You think because you clean the toilets here that you have authority. You are nothing, Sasha. Now get out of my way before I move you." He suddenly reached out to push past me, but stopped dead in his tracks. Loud, heavy footsteps echoed from the curved mahogany staircase behind me. I really did not have to turn around to know who it was. My older brother Trey had returned from his morning errand and was descending the stairs. The heavy footsteps stopped at the bottom of the stairs. My brother Trey stood there taking in the scene. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and sweatpants, but he still carried the authoritative presence of a top-tier corporate lawyer. His eyes darted from my father, whose face was red with anger, to my mother, who was clutching her designer bag like a shield. Then his gaze softened as he looked at me and little Leo, who was still hiding behind my leg. The transformation in my parents was immediate and honestly terrifying to watch. The hostility vanished from my father's face, replaced instantly by a bright artificial smile. He stood up straighter, adjusting his suit jacket, and puffed out his chest. My mother smoothed down her skirt and let out a forced, high-pitched laugh. They completely ignored my presence, now shifting all their attention to the son they actually claimed. "Trey, my boy. What an absolute surprise to see you here," my father boomed, stepping forward with his hand outstretched. "We had no idea you were working for the venture capital firm now. I always knew your law degree would get you into the right circles." My mother nodded eagerly, walking past me as if I was invisible. "It makes perfect sense," she chimed in. "The chief executive must have hired you as their legal counsel. We are so proud of you, Trey. You always know how to position yourself with the right people." Trey did not take my father's outstretched hand. He just stood there, his hands in his pockets, staring at them with a look of absolute disgust. The silence stretched on, making the grand foyer feel incredibly small. My father slowly lowered his hand, his fake smile faltering for a fraction of a second before he recovered his composure. "Listen, Trey," my father continued, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "We are here for a very important meeting with your boss. We are pitching a $5 million funding package for the church development and for your brother-in-law's re-election campaign. It is a guaranteed deal, but we need everything to go smoothly." He paused and shot a venomous glare in my direction. "And then we arrive and find your sister here scrubbing floors and embarrassing the family. She even brought that child with her. You need to talk to whoever manages the domestic staff and get her out of the front hallway before your boss comes down and sees this disaster." My mother leaned closer to Trey, whispering loudly, "We cannot let her ruin this for Derek and Alicia. You know how important this campaign is. Please, Trey, just use your influence and send her to the servants' quarters or the kitchen. We will pretend we do not know her." My heart pounded in my chest, but I remained completely silent. I wanted to see exactly how Trey would handle this. 5 years ago, when my parents threw me out into the freezing snow, Trey was the only one who answered my desperate phone call. He had driven across the city in the middle of the night to pick me up. He gave me a place to stay. He paid for my medical bills when I had Leo, and he encouraged me to finish my degree online. He knew the truth about my success because he had been there for every late-night strategy session and every tear-filled breakdown. Trey slowly walked past my parents, ignoring them completely. He walked straight over to me and crouched down to Leo's level. A genuine warm smile broke across his face. "Hey there, little man. Trey said softly. Uncle Trey? Leo squealed, letting go of my leg and throwing his little arms around Trey's neck. Trey picked him up effortlessly, resting Leo on his hip. My mother gasped loudly, placing her hand over her chest as if she was going to faint. Trey, what are you doing? My mother hissed, her voice trembling with indignation. Put that boy down immediately. You are wearing nice clothes and you do not know where he has been. He is probably filthy. If your boss sees you holding the maid's illegitimate child, you could lose your job. Trey turned to face them, and the warmth in his eyes vanished entirely. He looked at the two people who raised us as if he was looking at strangers. His jaw clenched, and I could see the anger simmering just beneath the surface. You two have not changed at all, have you? Trey said, his voice dangerously low and steady. 5 years and you are still the exact same arrogant, shallow people who care more about appearances than your own flesh and blood. My father's face darkened. Watch your tone with us, boy, he warned. We are your parents, and we are trying to protect your career. We are simply asking you to handle your sister before she ruins a multi-million-dollar business deal. Trey let out a dry, humorless laugh. It echoed off the marble walls, sounding harsh and bitter. He shifted Leo to his other hip and looked my father dead in the eye. You are making a fool of yourself, old man, Trey said. I do not work here. I do not work for the venture capital firm. Claire and I are just here visiting for the weekend. My parents exchanged a confused glance. My father frowned, his thick eyebrows drawing together. If you do not work here, then what are you doing in the executive's private estate? He asked. Trey gestured around the massive foyer, pointing to the sweeping staircase, the crystal chandelier, and the priceless artwork on the walls. I am staying here because my sister invited me, Trey explained slowly, as if he was speaking to a toddler. My mother blinked, her face twisting in confusion. Sasha invited you? She repeated. Why would the maid be allowed to invite guests to sleep over? Does the owner know she is treating this mansion like a hotel? Trey took a deep breath, shaking his head. He looked at me, and I gave him a slight nod. It was time to end their delusion. Sasha is not the maid. Mother. Trey said, his voice echoing clearly through the massive space. She is the owner. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. My parents stood frozen like statues. They stared at Trey, then turned their heads slowly to look at me. My father let out a nervous chuckle, shaking his head as if he had just heard a bad joke. That is a ridiculous joke, Trey, my father said, waving his hand dismissively. We do not have time for these games. We have a 10 o'clock appointment with the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Ventures. We know for a fact that the CEO owns this property. The broker told us so. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. I looked directly into my father's eyes, stripping away the terrified 20-year-old girl he remembered, and replacing her with the woman I had become. The broker was correct, I said, my voice calm and commanding. Apex Ventures owns this property. And I own Apex Ventures. My mother let out a sharp breath, stumbling backward slightly. Her designer heels clicked against the marble as she lost her balance. She looked at my simple cashmere sweater and leggings as if trying to magically transform them into a business suit. No, my mother whispered, her voice shaking. No, that is impossible. You are a high school graduate who got knocked up. You have nothing. You are nothing. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Actually, Mother, I have a master's degree in finance which I earned online while raising my son. I started a tech consulting firm that I sold 3 years ago for 8 figures. I used that money to found Apex Ventures. You are standing in my house on my marble floors, breathing my air. My father was turning pale. The reality of the situation was slowly crashing down on him. His eyes darted frantically around the grand entryway as if looking for hidden cameras or someone to jump out and tell him it was a prank. This is a lie. My father stammered, his voice losing its booming, confident edge. The CEO we are meeting is named Alexander. The emails were signed by Alexander. Alexander is my middle name, I replied smoothly. Sasha Alexander. It keeps the biased old men in the financial sector comfortable until we meet face to face. It seems it kept you comfortable too. The silence that followed was deafening. 5 years of their arrogance, 5 years of pretending I did not exist, was suddenly colliding with the undeniable reality of my success. They had come here ready to beg a stranger for millions of dollars to save their precious church and their golden child's political campaign. Instead, they were standing in the home of the daughter they had thrown away like trash. My father opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His face cycled through disbelief, confusion, and finally a deep, unsettling panic. He realized that the person holding the keys to his future, to his reputation and his power, was the same girl he had banished into the snow. Trey walked over and stood beside me holding Leo. We stood together, a united front looking down at the people who had tried to break us. The dynamic had completely shifted. They were no longer the powerful, imposing parents looking down on a disgraceful daughter. They were the desperate beggars standing in my kingdom. So I said softly, breaking the heavy silence. You mentioned you needed a $5 million loan for Derek's campaign. Please do come into the living room. Let us have a chat about your financial desperation. My parents stood frozen in the foyer for a long moment before my father finally swallowed his pride and took a stiff step forward following my invitation. He motioned for my mother to follow him. They walked slowly into my massive living room, their eyes darting around at the custom Italian furniture, the imported rugs and the soaring vaulted ceilings. My mother kept her hands tightly clasped around her purse, her knuckles turning stark white. They sat down on the very edge of the cream-colored sofa, looking entirely out of place in a home they assumed belonged to a stranger just 10 minutes ago. They were surrounded by the undeniable evidence of my success, and it was suffocating them. Before my father could open his mouth to try and spin the horrible situation and explain why they needed the $5 million, a new voice cut through the thick tension. Well, this is certainly an unexpected family reunion. I turned to see my sister-in-law, Claire, walking gracefully into the room. Claire was the absolute epitome of old money elegance. She was a tall, striking white woman from a massively prominent Atlanta real estate family. She was wearing a flowing silk robe, holding a delicate cup of herbal tea, and looking absolutely unbothered by the sudden intrusion. But I knew Claire very well. Beneath that calm, polite exterior was a fiercely protective woman who had become more of a sister to me than my own flesh and blood ever was. She had been there through my darkest days. The moment my parents saw Claire, their entire demeanor shifted yet again. They had always fawned over Claire. My mother worshipped the ground. Claire walked on simply because Claire's family name carried massive weight in the local high society and elite country club circles. My mother immediately put on her best fake smile and stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her skirt. "Oh, Claire, dear," my mother said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "It is so incredibly wonderful to see you. We had no idea you and Trey were staying here for the weekend. There has just been the most massive misunderstanding with Sasha out in the hall. You know how things get twisted when emotions run high?" Claire did not smile back. She did not even offer a polite nod of greeting. She simply took a slow sip of her tea, her icy blue eyes locked directly onto my mother. She walked slowly across the expensive rug and stood right next to me and Trey, forming an impenetrable wall of solidarity against them. "There is no misunderstanding," Brenda Claire said, her voice perfectly level, but carrying an edge sharp enough to cut glass. "The only misunderstanding here is your delusional belief that you could walk into this house and disrespect the woman who owns it." My mother flinched backward as if she had been physically slapped. She was not used to being spoken to this way, especially not by someone she desperately wanted to impress and associate with. "Claire. Please," my mother stammered, sitting back down heavily on the sofa. "You do not understand the complicated history here. Sasha made some very poor and sinful choices years ago. She brought deep shame to our church congregation. We had to make hard, agonizing decisions, as respectable Christian parents. Claire let out a soft, chilling laugh. Christian parents. She repeated the words, tasting like absolute poison on her tongue. Is that what you call yourselves today? Because I vividly remember the night Trey brought Sasha to our apartment 5 years ago. The room went dead silent. My father looked away, staring intently at the marble coffee table, unable to meet anyone's gaze. My mother swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously around the room, looking for an escape route that did not exist. Claire took a deliberate step closer to my parents, leaning in slightly. Let me refresh your selective memory, Brenda. Claire continued, her tone dropping to a dangerous, quiet whisper. It was the middle of January. It was sleeting outside. The temperature was well below freezing. Your 20-year-old daughter was pregnant, terrified, and begging for her own mother to help her. And what exactly did you do? We did what was necessary to protect the family. My father interjected, his voice entirely lacking its usual booming confidence. She broke the sacred rules of our house. Claire snapped her piercing gaze to my father, shutting him down instantly. You threw her out onto the street, Vernon. You literally pushed a pregnant, weeping girl out the front door into a winter storm and locked the deadbolt behind her. You did not even let her grab her winter coat from the closet. Trey found her shivering alone at a dark bus stop 3 hours later, her lips turning blue, crying so hard she could barely breathe. She almost lost her life and her child that night because of your pride. I felt a heavy lump form in my throat as Claire recounted that terrible night. It was a dark memory I tried to keep buried deeply away, but hearing Claire weaponize it against them felt incredibly validating. Trey placed a heavy, comforting hand on my shoulder, letting me know I was safe now. My mother gripped her designer bag tighter, looking defensive and cornered. We were trying to teach her a tough lesson, she muttered weakly. She had to learn that rebellious actions have severe consequences. Oh, she learned a lesson all right, Claire fired back without missing a single beat. She learned that the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally only loved her when she fit perfectly into their fake little picture. She learned that her own mother cared more about what the gossiping church ladies thought than whether her own daughter froze to death on a city bench. Claire gestured gracefully with her free hand toward the handbag my mother was holding onto like a life preserver. That is a very lovely Birkin bag. Brenda Claire noted, her voice suddenly casual and conversational. My family helped you secure that specific color 3 years ago, did they not? You carry it around every Sunday like a badge of honor to show everyone in the congregation how wealthy and blessed you are. My mother looked down at the luxury bag, suddenly looking deeply ashamed of it. Yes, Claire. Thank you, she whispered, barely audible. It is deeply funny, Claire mused, taking another slow sip of her tea. You will proudly carry a piece of leather that costs $20,000, but you would not spare a $20 blanket for your own child when she was carrying your grandson in her belly. You sit proudly in the front pew every single Sunday, preaching to the masses about grace and forgiveness, but your own heart is completely rotten to the core. How dare you? My father finally snapped, standing up abruptly, his face flushed with deep red anger. You may be from a very wealthy and powerful family, Claire, but you will not speak to my wife that way in my presence. You do not know the intense pressure we were under back then. Alicia was about to marry Derek. His political career was just starting to take off. We could not have an unwed pregnant girl ruining the pristine family image right before a major election campaign. The moment the ugly words left my father's mouth, he froze, realizing his massive mistake. He had just admitted out loud in front of all of us that they happily sacrificed me to protect my older sister's perfect, privileged life. I stared at him, feeling the very last tiny shred of hope I had ever held for them completely disintegrate into dust. Trey stepped forward instantly, placing his tall frame directly between Claire and my angry father. Sit back down, Vernon. Trey ordered, his voice cold, dark, and commanding. Do not ever raise your voice at my wife while you are standing inside my sister's house. My father slowly sank back onto the plush sofa, utterly defeated. The booming authoritative patriarch of the family was completely neutralized and stripped of all his false power. Claire looked down at them with profound disgust and pity. That is the most tragic irony of all this, Claire said softly, shaking her head. You sacrificed Sasha to protect Alicia and Derek. You threw your youngest daughter away like garbage to protect your precious public reputation. And now 5 years later, you are sitting right here in Sasha's living room, begging for her money to save that exact same politician from ruin. My parents looked at the floor entirely stripped of their pride and their dignity. The grandiose entrance they had planned, the arrogant demands they had made just moments ago, were all completely shattered. They were sitting trapped in the home of the daughter they discarded, finally realizing that she held absolutely all the cards to their future. Now, Claire said, turning around with a graceful sweep of her silk robe, I am going to go to the kitchen and finish having my morning breakfast. I highly suggest you both behave yourselves while Sasha decides if you are even worth a second more of her time. Claire walked slowly out of the room, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in her wake. I looked at my parents, watching them squirm uncomfortably in their expensive clothes, sitting on my expensive furniture. The power dynamic in the room had completely shifted permanently. They were entirely at my mercy, and every single person in the room knew it. I walked over to the oversized armchair directly across from them and sat down, crossing my legs elegantly. I rested my chin on my hand and looked at them with a totally blank, emotionless expression, letting them sweat under my gaze for a long moment. My father tugged nervously at his collar, suddenly looking like a very small man in a very big room. He cleared his throat, preparing to beg for the very money he thought he was going to easily demand from a stranger. The great and powerful Vernon was about to show me exactly how far he had fallen. My father cleared his throat again, shifting his weight on the expensive sofa. The silence in the room was heavy and punishing, but I refused to be the one to break it. Finally, he looked up at me, his eyes lacking the arrogant fire they possessed just 20 minutes ago. Sasha, he began, his voice strained and quiet. I know this is a massive shock to all of us. We came here expecting to meet a man named Alexander who runs Apex Ventures. We had a formal business proposal prepared for him. I leaned forward slightly, resting my arms on my knees. Well, Vernon, I replied softly, dropping the title of father entirely. You are looking at Alexander. So go ahead and pitch your proposal to me. Tell me why my venture capital firm should give you $5 million. My mother closed her eyes tightly, as if hearing the massive sum spoken out loud by the daughter she despised was physically painful to her. My father swallowed hard, nodding slowly. We are seeking a capital injection for two separate but connected projects, he explained, trying to adopt his professional pastoral tone. $2 million is needed for the church expansion project. Our congregation has grown significantly, and we are building a new community center to host more events. The other $3 million is to fund a political action committee supporting your brother-in-law Derek in his upcoming state Senate re-election campaign. I let out a low, humorless chuckle that echoed in the large room. So let me get this straight, I said, keeping my eyes locked on his. You want me? The daughter you threw into a freezing winter storm to finance a new building so you can stand on a bigger stage and preach about family values. And you want me to fund the political career of the man my sister married, the same sister who happily watched you throw me out like garbage. My father had the decency to look away, his face flushing red again. Red. It is not a donation, Sasha, he argued weakly. It is a loan. We have excellent collateral. The church owns valuable land downtown, and Derek has massive backing from powerful people in the state government. Once he is re-elected, the state contracts will flow in, and we can repay the firm with interest. Trey laughed from his spot by the window. Excellent collateral, he repeated, shaking his head in disgust. Vernon, you are sitting in the home of a venture capital CEO, and you are trying to lie about financial risk to her face. Derek is dropping in the polls. His major donors have quietly abandoned him over the last 3 months because of rumors regarding his personal spending. And the church land you mentioned is already heavily mortgaged to pay for the initial construction costs, which have massively overrun their budget. My parents stared at Trey in absolute shock. "How do you know all of that?" My mother gasped, clutching her purse tightly to her chest. Trey smirked coldly. "Because I am a corporate lawyer at a top firm in Atlanta, Brenda. It is my job to know when powerful men run out of money and make desperate moves. Your beloved Derek is sinking fast, and he is dragging your precious church down with him. You are not looking for an investment. You are looking for a bailout to hide the fact that your golden family is going completely bankrupt." The color drained from my mother's face completely. She looked terrified. She turned to me, her eyes wide and pleading. "Sasha, please understand the intense pressure we are under," she begged, her voice trembling. "Derek is the absolute pride of our family. Alicia built her identity around being a senator's wife. If he loses this election and the church expansion project officially fails, we will be the laughingstock of the entire community. Our reputation will be completely ruined. We will lose everything we worked so hard to build." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling a deep, cold emptiness, where my love for her used to reside. "Your reputation," I repeated softly. "That is all this has ever been about. You sacrificed me 5 years ago to protect your reputation, and now you are sitting in my house begging me to save it." My father leaned forward, clasping his hands together in a desperate, pleading gesture. "Sasha, I know we made terrible mistakes," he pleaded. "But we are still family. Derek is your brother-in-law. Alicia is your sister. You cannot just sit in this massive mansion with millions of dollars and let your own family lose everything they have. It is simply not Christian." I smiled, a slow, calculated smile that made my father flinch backwards. "Do not talk to me about what is Christian, Vernon," I warned him, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You lost the right to use religion to manipulate me the night you locked your doors while I begged for help in the snow." I sat back in my chair, crossing my legs elegantly. "So tell me, Vernon, what happens if Derek does not get this $3 million capital injection by the end of the month?" My father looked down at his shoes, defeated. "If he does not show the Political Action Committee that he has secured the funding by tomorrow morning, his remaining backers are pulling their support," he admitted quietly. "His campaign will officially go under, and the bank will immediately call in the loans on the church construction. We are completely out of time, Sasha. We need you to sign the authorization today, right now." Just as the words left his mouth, tires crunching on the gravel driveway echoed outside. Trey looked out the window and smiled grimly. "Well," Trey said, turning back to face the tense room, "it looks like the golden child has finally arrived to beg for herself." The heavy wooden front door swung open without a knock. Heavy footsteps echoed in the foyer, followed by the unmistakable sound of Alicia's shrill voice complaining about the gravel driveway. My sister walked into the living room like she was stepping onto a red carpet. She was dressed in a tailored white designer suit that screamed old money, accompanied by a massive diamond necklace that caught the light from my chandelier. Right behind her was Derek, her husband, the state senator. He had that polished fake smile plastered across his face, the one he used for campaign posters and television interviews. Alicia stopped dead in her tracks the moment her eyes landed on me. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her chest in an exaggerated gesture of shock. The smug smile vanished from her face, replaced instantly by a look of profound disgust. "Sasha, what in the world are you doing here?" Alicia demanded, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. She looked me up and down, taking in my simple cashmere sweater and leggings. "Did you follow Mom and Dad here to beg for money? Or let me guess, you found out some rich venture capitalist lives here and you decided to try your luck at trapping another man?" My mother jumped up from the sofa, her face pale with absolute terror. "Alicia, stop talking right now," she hissed, waving her hands frantically. "You do not understand what is happening here." But Alicia was never one to listen to anyone, especially when she felt superior. "Oh, please, Mom, do not defend her," Alicia scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. "I am sick of her embarrassing this family. We are here for a critical meeting with a multi-million-dollar investor, and Sasha is standing here looking like she just rolled out of a dumpster. Who let you in anyway? Did you sleep with the security guard at the gate?" I did not say a word. I just sat back in my armchair and watched her dig her own grave. The sheer arrogance radiating from her was suffocating, but it was also incredibly entertaining to watch someone so completely detached from reality. Derek stepped forward, adjusting his expensive silk tie. He looked at Trey, who was still standing by the window with a faint, amused smile. "Trey, get your sister out of here," Derek ordered, using his deep, authoritative politician voice. "This is a highly confidential financial meeting. I do not need some unwed teenage mother ruining my chances with Apex Ventures. My polling numbers are too important right now to deal with family drama." My father buried his face in his hands, letting out a low groan of despair. Vernon knew exactly how badly Derek and Alicia were destroying their own chances with every word they spoke, but he was too paralyzed by humiliation to stop them. Alicia walked further into the room, running her hand over the back of my custom Italian leather sofa. She looked around the massive living room with a look of intense greed in her eyes. "I have to admit, this Alexander guy has incredible taste," Alicia mused, completely ignoring the suffocating tension in the room. "I wonder if he is single. Maybe I can convince him to host my next charity gala right here in this living room." Derek could use the good press of being associated with such a wealthy donor. She turned back to me, her eyes narrowing with malicious delight. "So, Sasha, how much is he paying you?" Alicia sneered. "Because there is absolutely no other reason a billionaire would let a high school graduate with a bastard child hang around a mansion like this. Are you his little weekend entertainment?" "Alicia," my mother screamed, her voice cracking with sheer panic. "Shut your mouth right now. You are ruining everything." Alicia blinked, looking at our mother in genuine confusion. "Mom, why are you yelling at me?" she asked, sounding deeply offended. "I am just stating the obvious. Sasha is a stain on our family. She always has been. Ever since she got pregnant and tried to ruin my wedding 5 years ago, she has been nothing but a liability. I am just making sure she does not ruin this massive investment for Derek. We need that $5 million to secure his seat in the Senate." Derek nodded in agreement, puffing out his chest. "Alicia is right," Brenda Derek said smoothly. "We need to project an image of a perfect Christian family to this investor. Sasha does not fit that image. She is a failed woman. She needs to leave through the back door before the CEO comes down and sees her." I let out a slow, soft laugh. It started low in my chest and grew until it filled the entire room. Alicia and Derek stared at me like I had completely lost my mind. My parents just looked terrified. "You find this funny?" Derek snapped, his face flushing with anger. "My political career is on the line and you are sitting there laughing." "I am laughing, Derek," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy tone, "because your wife is standing in my living room insulting me while you are simultaneously begging for my money." Alicia rolled her eyes, letting out a loud, exaggerated sigh. "Your living room," she mocked, taking a step closer to me. "Your money. Are you completely delusional, Sasha? You live in a cheap rented apartment downtown. You do not have a dime to your name." Trey walked away from the window and stood next to my chair. He looked at Alicia with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. "Alicia, you really should have paid more attention to the financial documents before you came here to beg," Trey said, his voice completely flat. "Sasha is not the entertainment. Sasha is the chief executive officer of Apex Ventures. She owns this firm. She owns this house. And she is the one who holds the $5 million you are so desperate to get your hands on." Alicia froze. The smug, arrogant smile melted off her face so fast it was almost comical. Her eyes darted from Trey to me and then to our parents, who were both staring at the floor in silent, agonizing confirmation. No, Alicia whispered, her voice barely audible. No, that is a lie. That is a sick, twisted joke. Apex Ventures is run by a man named Alexander. Alexander is my middle name, I said, leaning forward and locking my eyes onto hers. Sasha Alexander. I built this empire from the ground up after you and your perfect parents threw me out into the snow. You came here today hoping to manipulate a wealthy stranger into bailing out your failing husband and your bankrupt church. Instead, you found me. Alicia's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked at the marble floors, the expensive art on the walls, and the massive diamond ring on my finger. The reality of her situation was crashing down on her, crushing her massive ego into dust. The golden child who had spent her entire life looking down on me was suddenly standing in the shadow of my success. Derek, however, did not look defeated. His initial shock quickly morphed into a dark, aggressive anger. He stepped in front of Alicia, his eyes locking onto mine with a cold, predatory glare. He was a man who was used to getting his way through intimidation and power, and he was not about to let his disgraced sister-in-law tell him no. Derek looked around the room, his political mind calculating the new reality. "You really own all of this?" Derek asked, his voice dropping an octave, sounding suddenly dangerous. "The venture capital firm, the real estate portfolio, all of it." "Every single penny," I replied smoothly, not breaking eye contact. "I earned it while you were busy spending your campaign funds on luxury vacations and custom-tailored suits." My mother whimpered softly from the sofa, but Derek ignored her. He was breathing heavily, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. The desperate politician was realizing that his entire future, his freedom and his reputation rested in the hands of the woman his wife had just called a cheap gold digger. Alicia finally found her voice, though it was shaky and weak. "Derek," she stammered, reaching out to touch his arm. "Derek, what are we going to do? We need that money. The bank is going to take our house." "Shut up," Alicia, Derek hissed, slapping her hand away without even looking at her. Alicia gasped, shrinking back in shock at his sudden aggression. The perfect marriage facade was already beginning to crack under the immense weight of their financial ruin. Derek turned his full attention back to me, his eyes dark and threatening, setting the stage for the real battle. Derek took a slow, deliberate step toward my armchair, his expensive leather shoes sinking into the thick imported rug. He puffed out his chest, trying to use his physical size and his political aura to intimidate me. It was the exact same posture he used during his aggressive campaign rallies when he was trying to bully a reporter or a debate opponent into submission. He wanted me to feel small. He wanted me to remember my place at the bottom of the family hierarchy. But I was not a junior reporter, and I was certainly not intimidated by a man who was drowning in his own debt. I remained completely still, my expression perfectly blank, simply watching him perform his desperate little routine. "Listen to me very carefully." Sasha Derek began, his voice smooth, but laced with absolute venom. "I do not care how many lucky investments you made, or how much money you managed to hustle out of this recent tech boom. You are still just a little girl playing in a world built by powerful men. You might own this firm on paper, but in the real world, in the state of Georgia, I am the one who holds the actual power. I sit on the legislative committees that regulate businesses exactly like yours. I can make one phone call and have inspectors tearing through your financial records before lunchtime tomorrow." I simply tilted my head, resting my chin on my hand. "Are you threatening to audit my company, Derek?" I asked, my tone completely flat and unbothered. "Because my compliance team is incredibly thorough, and we welcome any state review. You would only be wasting state resources and drawing much more attention to your own sinking ship." Derek let out a dark, condescending laugh. He leaned closer, resting his hands heavily on the glass coffee table that separated us. His breath smelled faintly of stale coffee and pure desperation. "I do not need to audit your company, Sasha," Derek whispered aggressively, his eyes wide and unblinking. I can make your life miserable in 100 different ways without ever touching your precious venture capital firm. He stood up straight and slowly turned his head to look directly at Trey, who was still standing calmly by the tall living room window. Derek's eyes narrowed as a wicked, desperate idea formed in his mind. If he could not break me directly, he was going to try and break the only person in the room I actually cared about. He pointed a perfectly manicured finger at my brother. Your brother here is a very successful corporate lawyer. Derek sneered, a cruel smile twisting his lips. He works for one of the most prestigious firms in all of Atlanta. It takes years of spotless ethical behavior and pristine public records to maintain a license like that. Trey did not even flinch. He just crossed his arms, waiting patiently for Derek to dig his hole even deeper into the ground. It would be a massive tragedy. Derek continued, his voice dripping with fake sympathy, if the Georgia State Bar Association suddenly received a series of anonymous ethics complaints regarding Trey's professional conduct. It would be even worse if the State Senate Committee on Legal Oversight decided to launch a formal investigation into his corporate firm. I have a lot of very close personal friends on the disciplinary board, Trey, men who owe me their careers and their political appointments. If I make one single phone call, your law license will be suspended, pending a very long, very public investigation. Your firm would fire you by the end of the week just to avoid the bad press. My mother gasped loudly, covering her mouth with her trembling hands. Derek, you cannot do that, she cried out, her voice filled with absolute panic. Trey is your brother-in-law. He is family. You cannot destroy his career just because Sasha is being stubborn about a simple business loan. Shut up, Brenda. Derek snapped viciously without even glancing in her direction. This stopped being about family the second your bastard daughter decided to play hardball with my political career. He turned his cold, dead eyes back to me. So here is how this is going to work, Sasha. You are going to call your financial officers right now. You are going to authorize the $5 million loan immediately without any further questions or delays. If you refuse, I will personally ensure that Trey never practices law in the state of Georgia ever again. I will ruin him, and I will make sure everyone in this city knows it was your fault. Alicia, who had been standing silently in shock, suddenly let out a small, cruel laugh. Her massive, fragile ego was desperately clinging to the aggressive power her husband was projecting. She walked over and stood next to Derek, looking down at me with that familiar mocking sneer she had perfected since childhood. You really thought you had us cornered, did you not? Sasha, Alicia mocked, adjusting her diamond necklace. You thought having a little bit of money made you untouchable. But Derek is a state senator. He has connections you cannot even begin to comprehend. So stop playing these pathetic little games. Sign the paperwork, authorize the bank transfer, and go back to being the invisible little mistake you have always been. The absolute audacity of her words hung heavily in the warm morning air. My father was staring at Derek with a mixture of horror and dawning realization. Vernon was finally seeing the true monster he had allowed his golden daughter to marry. The perfect Christian politician was standing in my living room, openly committing extortion and blackmail in front of 4 witnesses simply because he was losing his grip on his own artificial power. Trey let out a deep, genuine laugh that seemed to startle both Derek and Alicia. Trey pushed himself off the windowsill and walked slowly toward the center of the room. Derek, you are a remarkably stupid man, Trey said, his voice echoing with absolute unshakable authority. You just threatened to destroy the career of a corporate attorney while standing in a room full of people. Did you really think blackmailing me would force Sasha to hand over $5 million of her investors' capital? You are not acting like a powerful state senator right now, Derek. You are acting like a desperate cornered rat trying to chew its way out of a trap. Derek's face flushed purple with unbridled rage. His hands curled into tight white-knuckled fists, and for a second I thought he was actually going to try and strike my brother. Are you calling my bluff, Trey? Derek growled, taking a threatening step forward, closing the distance between them. Because I promise you, I will make the call right now. I will ruin you before the sun goes down. I had heard enough of his empty, pathetic threats. I slowly uncrossed my legs and sat up straight in my leather chair. The games were officially over. It was time to show Derek exactly what real power looked like. I reached down beside my chair and picked up a thick navy blue folder that I had prepared specifically for this moment. I placed it softly onto the glass coffee table right in front of Derek's aggressive stance. The soft thud of the folder hitting the glass silenced the entire room instantly. I did not hurry. I let the silence stretch out, allowing the tension to wrap around Derek's throat like a tightened noose. I slowly opened the navy blue folder, smoothing my hand over the crisp white pages inside. The paper was covered in columns of numbers and transaction records. It was the detailed financial anatomy of a corrupt state senator. Derek swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing, but he tried to maintain his aggressive stance. "What is that?" he demanded, his voice losing a fraction of its booming confidence. "Some fake printouts you made to try and scare me." I did not look up at him. I just stared at the first page of the dossier. "This is a comprehensive audit of the Political Action Committee you manage, Derek." I began, my voice calm and perfectly steady. "My firm acquired the analytics company that processes data for your bank. When Trey told me you were coming here to beg for money, I decided to have my team run a very quiet background check on your accounts." Derek's face went completely pale. His political bravado vanished, replaced by stark, naked fear. "Let us start with the church expansion project," I said, flipping to the second page. "Vernon, you mentioned that the church land is heavily mortgaged to cover construction costs. But according to these bank records, the construction company you hired is a shell corporation registered in Delaware, a corporation entirely owned by Derek." My father let out a choked gasp, grabbing the arm of the sofa to steady himself. "What are you talking about?" Sasha Vernon croaked. "Derek secured that contractor for us. He said they gave us a massive discount." "He did not give you a discount, Vernon," I replied softly, looking at my father with icy pity. "He gave you a fake invoice. On October 12th of last year, the church transferred $400,000 to this contractor for foundational concrete work. The concrete was never poured. 2 days later, $350,000 was wired from that shell company into a private offshore account in the Bahamas. An account registered under Alicia's maiden name. She looked at Derek with wide, terrified eyes. "Derek, you told me those documents I signed were for a blind trust for the campaign," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You told me it was standard political procedure." "Shut up, Alicia," Derek hissed violently, not looking at her. "Give me those papers right now, Sasha. Those are illegally obtained confidential documents." Trey moved faster than Derek, stepping directly in his path and shoving him backward by the shoulders. "Do not touch my sister," Trey warned, his voice deadly calm. "And do not touch her property. Sit down and listen while she finishes dismantling your pathetic little life." Derek stumbled backward, his chest heaving, but he was trapped. I looked back down at the folder, turning another page. The church funds were just the beginning. I continued, my voice echoing loudly in the silent room. "Let us talk about the campaign donations. Over the last 14 months, Derek has systematically embezzled roughly $1.2 million from his own re-election fund. He categorized these withdrawals as consulting fees, but the money did not go to political consultants. I read down the list. $80,000 for a customized Porsche Cayenne registered in Midtown Atlanta. $45,000 spent over 6 weekends at high-stakes poker tables in Las Vegas. $200,000 wired directly to a private real estate broker to secure the mortgage on the Buckhead mansion you currently live in, Alicia. The very same mansion you love to brag about to the church congregation." My mother was openly sobbing now, rocking back and forth on the sofa. She was watching her perfect Christian family image burn to the ground right in front of her eyes. "Oh, Lord," Brenda wailed, clutching her chest. "We will be disgraced." "You are already disgraced, Brenda," I said, not raising my voice but making sure it cut through her loud sobs. You let a thief stand at the pulpit and steal from your own congregation just so you could say your daughter married a state senator. You traded your morality for a luxury handbag and a front row seat to a political campaign that was entirely funded by fraud. Derek was sweating profusely, looking like a trapped animal. You cannot prove any of this, he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the folder. Those are just numbers on a page. My lawyers will tear that apart in court. I have immunity. I have friends in the Justice Department. Your friends in the Justice Department are the exact reason why my compliance team bypassed local authorities, I replied smoothly. I sent copies of this entire dossier to the Federal Bureau of Investigation early this morning. Federal agents do not care about your local political connections. Derek. Wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzling from a registered tax-exempt religious organization are federal crimes. They carry mandatory minimum sentences. Derek collapsed into a nearby armchair, his legs completely giving out beneath him. He stared blankly at the glass coffee table, all the fight completely drained out of him. The powerful state senator, who had just threatened to destroy my brother's career, was gone. In his place was a terrified criminal, waiting for the federal agents to kick his door down. Alicia was hyperventilating, her hands shaking wildly as she looked around the room. She could not process the fact that her entire reality was built on stolen money. She walked over to Derek, grabbing him by the shoulders and shaking him. "Tell me, she is lying!" Derek, Alicia screamed. "Tell me you did not steal the church money. Tell me we are not going to lose our house." Derek did not even look at her. He just stared blankly ahead, his mind racing to find a way out of a trap that had already closed around him. He knew it was over. The bank was going to seize everything. His political career was dead. He was going to prison. I watched them crumble, feeling a deep, overwhelming sense of satisfaction. For 5 years, I had carried the heavy burden of their shame. I had let them convince me that I was the broken one, that I was the failure who deserved to be thrown out into the cold. But sitting here in my own home looking at the absolute devastation I had just orchestrated, I realized the profound truth. They were the broken ones. They were the failures. And I was the one holding the hammer that smashed their fake glass house to pieces. My father slowly stood up from the sofa, looking older and far more fragile than he had when he walked through my front door. He looked at me with tears streaming down his face. His pride was completely gone, entirely replaced by crushing despair. "Sasha, please," he begged, his voice breaking. "I am begging you. Withdraw the documents. Tell the feds it was a mistake. We can fix this internally. We can sell the assets and pay the church back. You cannot send your own sister to prison for a blind trust she did not understand. You have to save us." I leaned back in my chair, interlacing my fingers and studying my father carefully. "Withdraw the documents," I repeated softly, rolling the absurd request around in my mouth. "Vernon, you are still functioning under the delusion that I have any desire to protect you. You stood there and watched Derek threaten Trey's law license. You stood there and allowed Alicia to insult me in my own home. And now that the tables have turned and your golden family is facing the actual consequences of their actions, you expect me to jump in and save you." I stood up from my chair, picking up the navy blue folder. I walked over to the fireplace where a small, warm fire was burning gently. I looked at the folder, the physical manifestation of Derek's destruction, and then I looked back at my ruined family. "There is no fixing this internally, Vernon," I said. "The funds are gone. The federal agents already have the digital trail. Derek is going to spend the next 10 years in a federal penitentiary, and Alicia is going to have to explain to her high society friends why her designer clothes are being auctioned off to pay for her criminal defense attorneys. The $5 million you came here to beg for cannot save you now." The finality of my words hung in the air like a thick, suffocating cloud. Vernon slowly sank back onto the sofa, his face buried in his trembling hands. Brenda continued to weep quietly, her tears staining the expensive leather of her designer handbag. Derek remained completely paralyzed in the armchair, his eyes wide and vacant, staring at a future that now consisted entirely of concrete walls and federal charges. But Alicia could not accept the silence. Her entire reality was built on the foundation of being better than everyone else. She was the golden child, the perfect Christian daughter, the prominent wife of a powerful state senator. The realization that her life was funded by stolen church money and that her husband was a criminal was simply too massive for her fragile ego to process. Her mind instantly and violently rejected the truth. She needed a scapegoat. She needed someone else to blame, so she would not have to look in the mirror and face her own absolute failure. Alicia began to pace back and forth across the imported rug, her sharp designer heels clicking frantically against the hardwood floor. She was breathing heavily, her chest heaving as she muttered under her breath, shaking her head in aggressive denial. "It cannot be true," she whispered rapidly, her voice raw and panicked. "Derek is a good man. We are good people. We go to church every Sunday. We host charity dinners. God would not let this happen to us. God protects righteous people." She stopped pacing and whipped her head around to look at me. Her perfectly styled hair was beginning to come undone, falling in messy strands across her tear-streaked face. The hatred in her eyes was so thick and toxic, it almost felt physical. She pointed a shaking manicured finger at my chest. "You did this?" Alicia accused, her voice escalating into a frantic screech. "You fabricated those documents to destroy us because you are jealous. You have always been so bitterly jealous of my perfect life. You could never find a good husband, so you decided to use your dirty money to ruin mine." I did not even blink. I simply watched her unravel, feeling absolutely nothing but profound pity for the pathetic woman standing before me. "Alicia, you are married to a thief," I said, my voice perfectly calm and flat. "You can scream at me all you want, but it will not stop the federal agents from seizing your bank accounts tomorrow morning." Alicia let out a guttural sound of pure frustration. She looked around the massive room, searching desperately for something to attack, something to tear down, so she could elevate herself again. Right at that exact moment, the heavy swinging door that led to the kitchen slowly pushed open. Little Leo walked out into the tense living room, holding a small glass of water in his tiny hands. Claire had poured it for him, and he was carefully carrying it back to the rug where he had been building his toy tower earlier. He was completely oblivious to the absolute destruction that had just occurred. He just looked at the angry adults with wide, innocent eyes, his small brow furrowing in confusion. Alicia's wild, frantic gaze snapped away from me and locked directly onto my sweet, innocent son. The desperate need to deflect her own crushing humiliation had finally found its target. Her face twisted into an ugly, vicious mask of pure malice. The perfect Christian woman completely vanished, leaving behind a cruel, cornered bully who was willing to destroy a child to save her own pride. "There it is!" Alicia shrieked, raising her arm and pointing directly at Leo. "There is the real reason our family is falling apart. Look at him. Look at that mistake." My blood turned to absolute ice. Every maternal instinct in my body flared up instantly. I took a slow, deliberate step toward my sister, my hands curling into tight fists. "Do not say another word, Alicia." I warned, my voice dropping to a dangerous, deadly whisper. "Do not even look at my son." But Alicia was completely unhinged. She could not stop herself. The dam had broken, and all her toxic venom came pouring out. She ignored my warning and took a heavy, aggressive step toward little Leo. "He is not a son, Sasha," Alicia yelled, her voice echoing painfully off the high vaulted ceilings. "He is a bastard. He is a walking, breathing reminder of your disgusting sins. You brought an illegitimate child into a respectable Christian home, and you expect God to bless you. No. This is a curse. You brought a curse upon our family the day you got pregnant with that stain." Trey moved forward, his jaw clenched tight, preparing to physically remove Alicia from the room. Vernon and Brenda just sat there completely paralyzed by the sheer violence of their golden daughter's outburst. They did not tell her to stop. They did not defend their own grandson. They just watched her verbally assault a 5-year-old boy. Derek is a good man who made a few financial mistakes under immense political pressure. Alicia continued, her voice growing louder and more hysterical with every word. But you, Sasha, you are a moral failure. You have always been the rotten branch of this family tree. You think, because you have a big house and some venture capital firm, that it washes away the fact that you are a disgrace. That boy is an abomination. He is a living, breathing sin that ruined my wedding and ruined my perfect family. Leo stopped walking, his tiny body freezing in place. He did not understand all the cruel words his aunt was screaming, but he understood the sheer hatred radiating from her face. His bottom lip began to tremble, and his large, bright eyes filled with frightened tears. He looked around, looking for me. His little hands gripping the smooth glass of water so tightly, his knuckles turned white. Alicia saw his fear, and it only fueled her cruel tirade. She took another aggressive stomping step toward him, leaning forward like a predator cornering its prey. "You hear me? You little mistake!" Alicia spat, her face turning an ugly shade of red. "You do not belong in this family. You never belonged. You are the reason everything is ruined." The sudden, loud aggression from the woman towering over him was too much for a 5-year-old to process. Leo flinched violently, stepping backward to get away from her screaming face. As he stumbled backward, his tiny hands lost their grip on the slippery cup. The glass slipped through his fingers, falling in slow motion toward the hardwood floor right next to the edge of the imported rug. It hit the floor with a loud, sharp crash that shattered the heavy tension in the room. Shards of glass exploded outward, scattering across the polished wood, while ice water splashed violently over the floorboards and soaked into the edge of the expensive rug. Leo let out a terrified gasp, jumping back from the shattered glass and bursting into tears. He covered his face with his small hands, sobbing quietly from the sudden shock and the overwhelming fear of the screaming woman standing over him. "Look what he did!" Alicia shrieked, throwing her hands up in the air as if the spilled water was the ultimate proof of her deranged argument. "Look at this mess. He ruins everything he touches. He is destroying your house just like he destroyed our family." The sound of my son crying, the sight of his tiny body shaking with fear as he stood barefoot near broken glass, shattered whatever restraint I had left. The professional venture capital CEO disappeared entirely. The only thing left in the room was a mother who was about to absolutely annihilate the woman who dared to terrorize her child. I did not speak. I did not scream. I moved across the room with a cold, calculated fury that was infinitely more dangerous than any outburst. Alicia had just crossed the final line, and there was no going back. She was about to learn that deflecting her problems onto my son was the most catastrophic mistake she could have possibly made. The sound of the shattered glass on the hardwood floor seemed to echo forever in the tense silence of my living room. Alicia did not back down when my son started to cry. Instead, her face twisted into an even uglier mask of pure, unhinged rage. She was completely losing her grip on reality, and in her desperate need to find a scapegoat, she decided to physically attack a terrified 5-year-old boy. She lunged forward, her high heels crunching sickeningly over the broken glass. Her hand shot out, reaching for Leo with her perfectly manicured nails looking like claws. I moved faster than I ever thought possible. The instinct to protect my child overrode every single professional boundary and every ounce of polite restraint I possessed. I crossed the distance between the armchair and the edge of the rug in a fraction of a second. Just as Alicia's hand clamped down hard on the soft fabric of Leo's long-sleeve sweater, I grabbed her wrist. I did not just hold her back. I gripped her forearm with a crushing force, digging my fingers into her skin until I felt her bones grind together. "Let go of him, Alicia," I hissed, my voice dropping to a low, venomous growl that did not even sound like my own. Alicia gasped in shock at the sudden physical pain, but she was too consumed by her own toxic breakdown to retreat. She yanked her arm backward, trying to break my grip. In doing so, she pulled Leo along with her. My sweet little boy stumbled forward, crying out in pain as the fabric of his sweater stretched tightly across his shoulder. The sudden, violent movement caused the long sleeve of his sweater to push violently upward, bunching up tightly around his elbow. I yanked Alicia's arm downward, forcing her to release her grip on my son. Trey was suddenly there, stepping between us and pushing Alicia roughly backward until she stumbled and almost fell over the heavy glass coffee table. I immediately dropped to my knees on the floor, pulling Leo tightly into my chest. I wrapped my arms around his small, trembling body, shielding him from the absolute madness of the adults in the room. "It is okay, baby," I whispered, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. "Mommy has you. Nobody is going to hurt you." As I held him, Leo wrapped his little arms around my neck, burying his tear-streaked face into my shoulder. His left arm was completely exposed under the bright light of the crystal chandelier overhead. The rolled-up sleeve revealed his entire forearm. And there it was. Right on the inside of his wrist, standing out starkly against his warm brown skin, was a very distinct brick-red birthmark. It was not just a random discoloration or a messy blotch. It was shaped like a perfect crescent moon. The edges were slightly raised, and the color was a deep, unmistakable rust red that looked almost like it had been painted on by hand. I had kissed that little birthmark 1,000 times over the past 5 years. To me, it was just a beautiful, unique part of the little boy I loved more than life itself. But to the people standing in my living room, that specific mark was a ticking time bomb that had just reached zero. The screaming and the frantic pacing suddenly stopped. The entire room was plunged into an eerie, suffocating silence. The only sound was the soft sniffling of my son against my shoulder and the heavy, ragged breathing of my sister. I looked up from the floor and saw Derek. He had been standing rigidly by the sofa, watching his wife completely unravel. But now his eyes were not on Alicia. His gaze was completely locked onto Leo's exposed wrist. All the color rapidly drained from Derek's face, leaving him looking pale and sickly. His eyes widened in absolute shock, and his mouth fell open slightly. He looked like a man who had just been forcefully punched in the stomach. He took a slow, shaky step forward, completely ignoring the shards of broken glass under his shoes. His eyes never left the crescent moon mark on my son's skin. He was staring at it with a mixture of profound confusion and rising, undeniable horror. Vernon and Brenda noticed Derek's sudden paralysis. My father followed Derek's gaze, peering over the back of the sofa to see what had captured his son-in-law's attention. When Vernon's eyes landed on the red birthmark on Leo's wrist, he let out a sharp, strangled gasp. He staggered backward, falling heavily onto the sofa cushions as if his legs could no longer support his weight. My mother leaned forward, her eyes narrowing before they widened in pure, absolute terror. She covered her mouth with both hands, shaking her head frantically back and forth in silent, desperate denial. "No," my mother whispered through her fingers, her voice trembling violently. "No, no, it is just a coincidence. It is just a normal mark." But Derek knew it was not a normal mark. He slowly tore his eyes away from my son and turned his head to look directly at Alicia. His wife was still breathing heavily, trying to recover her composure after Trey had pushed her back. She had not yet realized what everyone else in the room was staring at. She was too busy glaring at me with absolute hatred to notice that her own husband was looking at her like she was a monster. Alicia, Derek said, his voice sounding hollow and completely devoid of emotion. "What is on that boy's arm?" Alicia blinked, looking confused by the sudden shift in his tone. "What are you talking about, Derek?" she snapped defensively, rubbing her wrist where I had grabbed her. "He spilled water all over the floor. He is a menace just like his mother." Derek took another heavy step toward her, closing the distance between them until he was standing uncomfortably close to her face. "Look at his arm!" Alicia, Derek commanded, his voice rising in volume and intensity. Look at the inside of his wrist right now. Alicia frowned, but she finally turned her head and looked down at where I was kneeling with Leo. Her eyes scanned my son's exposed arm. The moment her gaze locked onto the brick-red crescent moon, she froze entirely. The angry, defiant posture she had been holding on to completely collapsed. Her shoulders slumped, her breathing stopped, and a look of pure, unadulterated dread washed over her features. She looked exactly like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming truck right before the devastating impact. That birthmark, Derek continued, his voice shaking with a dangerous, barely contained fury. You told me about that birthmark on our honeymoon, Alicia. You showed me the exact same mark on your left shoulder blade. You told me it was a very rare genetic trait. You bragged about it. You told me it was exclusive to the women in your maternal bloodline. Your grandmother had it, your mother has it, and you have it. The silence in the room became incredibly heavy, pressing down on all of us like a physical weight. My parents were completely frozen, unable to offer even a single word of defense for their golden child. They knew exactly what that birthmark meant. They had known the truth for 5 long years, and now their massive, sickening lie was unraveling right in front of the man they had lied to. How Derek demanded, grabbing Alicia roughly by both of her shoulders and shaking her. How does the illegitimate son of your sister have the exclusive genetic birthmark of your specific bloodline, Alicia? Tell me right now before I lose my mind. Alicia opened her mouth, but no words came out. She just stared at her husband, her eyes wide with sheer panic, while the empire of lies she had built began to crash down around her, completely destroying everything she had ever valued. Derek did not let her look away. He reached out and grabbed her chin, forcing her to look directly into his eyes. His grip was not gentle. It was the grip of a man whose entire reality was suddenly fracturing into a million jagged pieces. I asked you a question, Alicia. He said, his voice dangerously calm, now the kind of calm that comes right before a massive, devastating hurricane. How does that boy have your grandmother's birthmark? The one you told me only passes from mother to child in your direct maternal line. You told me about that mark when we were talking about having kids of our own. You sat on the edge of our hotel bed in Maui and told me you hoped our future daughter would inherit it. So tell me right now why Sasha's illegitimate son has it stamped perfectly on his wrist. Alicia began to tremble violently. Her lower lip quivered and tears welled up in her eyes, but they were not tears of guilt or remorse. They were the frantic tears of a narcissist who had finally been caught in an inescapable trap. She was desperately searching for a lie, any lie that could save her, but her mind was completely blank. Before she could formulate a pathetic excuse, my mother suddenly stood up from the sofa, her hands waving frantically in the air, trying to intercept the incoming disaster. Derek. Please, my mother cried out, her voice shrill and desperate, echoing loudly in the tense room. You are not thinking clearly. You are letting the stress of the election get to you. Sasha is Alicia's biological sister. They share the exact same bloodline. It is perfectly natural that a genetic trait could jump around in a family tree. It is just basic biology, Derek. There is absolutely no reason to overreact and accuse your poor wife of something so crazy and impossible. Derek slowly turned his head to look at my mother. His eyes were completely devoid of any respect or warmth. He looked at her like she was a stranger he despised. Do not insult my intelligence, Brenda, Derek sneered, his voice dripping with pure disgust. I am not some naive idiot in your church congregation that you can manipulate with half-baked excuses and fake smiles. Alicia was very specific when she told me about that mark. She told me her specialist doctor explained it to her when she got tested for genetic markers. The crescent moon mark does not skip a generation. It does not jump sideways to a younger sister. It goes straight down the direct maternal line. Only a mother who carries the gene can pass it directly to her own biological child. My father stood up next, placing a protective, shaking hand on my mother's arm. He puffed out his chest, trying to reclaim some of his lost pastoral authority, but he just looked like a pathetic, scared old man. Now listen here. Derek Vernon stammered, his voice lacking its usual booming confidence. You are under a massive amount of stress with the campaign and those fake financial documents Sasha showed you. Your mind is simply playing tricks on you. It is just a red mark on a child's arm. Babies get them all the time. It will probably fade entirely as he gets older. We do not need to tear this beautiful Christian family apart over a simple skin discoloration. Derek let out a harsh, bitter laugh that made Vernon flinch backward. Tear this family apart, Derek repeated, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. He let go of Alicia's chin and took a heavy step back, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, ruining his polished politician look completely. He looked from Alicia to my parents, and then finally to me, still kneeling on the floor holding my son. His eyes darted back and forth rapidly, as his political brain, the brain that was trained to find loopholes and connect complicated dots, suddenly started putting the pieces of a 5-year-old puzzle together right in front of us. 5 years ago, Derek muttered, staring blankly at the shattered glass on the hardwood floor. 5 years ago, right before our wedding, you were acting so strange, Alicia. You were taking all those private trips to that luxury fitness retreat out of state. You said you needed to decompress and lose weight before the big day. You were gone for weeks at a time. And then suddenly, right before the wedding, Sasha is inexplicably pregnant and refusing to name the father. Derek looked up, his eyes locking onto Vernon with a terrifying intensity. And you threw her out, Derek said, his voice rising in volume. You practically shoved your own youngest daughter out the front door in the middle of a freezing winter night. You told the entire church congregation she was a wicked disgrace, and you forbade anyone from speaking to her ever again. I thought you were just being incredibly strict religious parents upholding your rigid values. But you were not protecting your faith, were you, Vernon? You were not protecting the church. You were protecting the golden child. You were protecting the senator's wife. Alicia let out a loud, dramatic sob, reaching out to grab Derek's arm. Derek, stop, she pleaded, her voice cracking with forced emotion. You are making up a crazy conspiracy theory. I am your loving wife. You know I have severe fertility issues. You know we have been trying to conceive a baby for years without any success. How could I possibly be the mother of that boy? It is medically impossible, Derek. You are letting Sasha get inside your head and ruin our marriage just like she always wanted to do because she is jealous of me. Derek looked down at Alicia's hand gripping his expensive suit sleeve. He looked at her manicured fingers as if a poisonous snake had just wrapped itself around his arm. He roughly shoved her hand away, making her stumble backward in her high heels. Do not touch me, Derek hissed violently. Do not ever touch me again. You think I am stupid, Alicia. You think I do not remember the timeline. You think I do not remember how quickly you rushed the wedding planning right after your little fitness retreat. You lied to me about everything. Derek stared at my mother, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with a mixture of absolute rage and profound humiliation. He realized in that exact moment that his entire perfect marriage, his entire pristine public image, was built on a foundation of pure deceit, orchestrated by the very people who claimed to be the most righteous Christians in Atlanta. He had been completely played for 5 long years. Derek stood completely paralyzed as the echo of Brenda's confession faded into the high ceilings of the living room. His chest stopped moving, and his eyes stared blankly at his mother-in-law, as if she had just transformed into a terrifying monster right in front of him. The man at the gym, she had said. We had to protect her future. Those words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, choking the life out of his perfect political narrative. Alicia let out a strangled gasp and turned on her mother, her face contorted in absolute panic. Mom, shut up! Alicia shrieked, her voice cracking wildly. What are you talking about? You are confused. You are lying. Tell him you are lying. But Brenda just sat there weeping into her hands, realizing the catastrophic mistake she had just made. She had tried to excuse the behavior, and in doing so, she had confessed to the crime. Derek slowly turned his head back to Alicia. The look in his eyes was no longer just anger. It was a cold, dead emptiness. It was the look of a man staring at a total stranger. A man at the gym. Derek repeated his voice, a flat, mechanical monotone that was far more terrifying than any scream. A man at the gym took advantage of you. Alicia shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. No, Derek, please, she begged, stepping toward him but stopping when he raised a hand to block her. It is not true. She is just old and stressed. My mother is losing her mind. Look at Sasha. Look at that boy. He is Sasha's mistake. Everyone knows it. The whole church knows it. Why would you believe a crazy slip of the tongue over the facts? That is exactly the problem, Alicia. A calm, steady voice interrupted. You have relied on rumors and fake Christian gossip for so long that you forgot what actual facts look like. Trey walked forward, his footsteps loud and deliberate against the hardwood floor. He stepped carefully around the shattered glass and the spilled water, standing directly between Derek and my panicked sister. Trey reached into the inside pocket of his gray sweatpants and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. It had the official crest of a premier medical diagnostic laboratory stamped clearly on the front. The entire room went dead silent again. All eyes were glued to the white envelope in my brother's hand. Trey looked at my parents, who were cowering on the sofa, and then he looked at Alicia, who was trembling so hard her diamond necklace rattled against her collarbone. You see, Derek, Trey began, his voice echoing with the polished authority of a courtroom lawyer. 5 years ago, when my parents threw a pregnant 20-year-old girl out into a winter storm, I was the one who drove her to the hospital. I was the one who paid the medical bills. And because I am a very careful attorney, I am also the one who requested a full panel of genetic testing the day little Leo was born. I wanted to make sure there were no underlying health issues we needed to prepare for. Trey stepped up to the glass coffee table. He tossed the envelope onto the glass. It landed with a soft, distinct thud right next to the navy blue folder containing Derek's financial ruin. I held on to these results for 5 years. Trey continued, staring directly at Alicia's pale, terrified face. Sasha made me promise never to use them because she actually loved this little boy, and she did not want him to grow up knowing his real mother was a monster who tried to throw him away like garbage. But since you decided to stand in her house and call her son a bastard, I think it is time we look at the facts. Derek did not wait for anyone else to move. He lunged forward, leaning over the glass table, and snatched the white envelope. His hands were shaking so violently that he tore the paper in half trying to get it open. He pulled out a stack of crisp medical documents stamped with red, certified seals. Derek's eyes darted back and forth across the pages, scanning the complex medical jargon until he found the final summary page. The silence in the room was absolute. The only sound was the rustling of the paper in Derek's trembling hands and the quiet, rhythmic breathing of Leo, who was still tucked safely against my chest. Derek read the words once, then he read them again. His breathing became shallow and rapid. Trey did not even need to look at the paper. He had memorized it 5 years ago. Go ahead and read the probability of maternity, Derek Trey instructed, his voice ringing out clearly. Read the genetic markers comparing Sasha to the child. Derek swallowed hard, his throat completely dry. 0%, Derek whispered, his voice barely audible. Probability of maternity for Sasha is 0%. Alicia let out a loud, pathetic whimper, backing away until her spine hit the wall. She wrapped her arms around herself, shaking uncontrollably. Now read the second page, Trey commanded, his tone growing harder and more punishing. The one where we ran the child's DNA against the National Registry and pulled a familial match. A direct match to a woman who had her blood drawn for a luxury fitness and wellness retreat out of state right around the time of conception. Derek slowly turned to the second page. His eyes widened as he saw the name printed clearly in black ink. Probability of maternity for Alicia is 99.9%. Derek read aloud, his voice cracking on the final word. The paper slipped from his fingers, fluttering down to the floor and landing near the broken glass. The ultimate truth was finally out in the open, raw and undeniable. Sasha is not the mother, Trey stated plainly, making sure every single person in the room heard the words clearly. Sasha has never been the mother. She took the blame, she took the shame, and she took the punishment to protect your pathetic reputation, Alicia. She raised your son. She loved your son, while you paraded around the church acting like a saint. You are the one who got pregnant by your personal trainer. You are the one who tried to abandon your baby at a fire station before Sasha stopped you. You are the mother of the child you just called a mistake. Alicia slowly slid down the wall, collapsing onto the floor in a heap of designer white fabric. She buried her face in her knees, sobbing loudly, but there was no sympathy left in the room for her. My father was staring at the wall, his mouth hanging open, unable to process the sheer magnitude of the lies his family had constructed. My mother was crying so hard she was gasping for air, gripping her chest as if her heart was physically breaking. Derek stood over the scattered medical papers, looking down at the wife he had adored. The woman he thought was the perfect political partner. He realized that every single thing she had ever told him was a calculated lie. She had forced her younger sister into exile to hide her own infidelity. And the little boy she had just verbally abused, the little boy she called a stain on their Christian family, was her own flesh and blood. The golden child was officially dead, and the monster beneath the mask was finally exposed to the light. Derek looked away from his trembling wife and slowly turned his gaze toward my father, who was still staring blankly at the wall. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by Alicia's muffled sobs and my mother's heavy, gasping breaths. Derek took a slow, deliberate step toward Vernon. His voice, when he finally spoke, was so quiet and dangerously controlled that it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "How long did you know?" Vernon Derek asked, each word clipping through the air like a razor blade. "Did you know before the wedding? Did you stand there in that church and give away your pregnant daughter to me, knowing exactly what she had done?" Vernon flinched, as if he had been physically struck. He slowly turned his head to look at Derek, his eyes filled with a pathetic mixture of fear and shame. "Derek, son, you have to understand." Vernon stammered, his voice weak and trembling. "We did not know until the very last minute. Alicia came to us crying just 3 weeks before the ceremony. The invitations were already sent. Your political career was just taking off. The church was so proud of the union. If we had canceled the wedding, the scandal would have destroyed everything. We had to make a sacrifice for the greater good of the family." For the greater good, Derek repeated the words, tasting like poison in his mouth. He let out a harsh, humorless laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. "So you decided that throwing your youngest daughter out into the snow was the greater good. You let Sasha take the blame. You let the entire congregation brand her as a sinner. You let me ban her from my home. All to cover up the fact that your perfect golden child was sleeping with some random trainer at a luxury gym." Alicia scrambled to her feet, her white designer suit wrinkled and stained with tears. "Derek, it was a mistake," she cried, grabbing desperately at his arm. "I was so stressed about the wedding. He meant nothing to me. I swear to you, he meant nothing. When I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. I did not know what to do. I could not ruin your career. I could not lose you." Derek yanked his arm away with such violent force that Alicia stumbled backward, hitting the wall with a loud thud. "Do not touch me!" he roared, his composure completely shattering. "You did not do this to save my career, Alicia. You did this to save your own pathetic lifestyle. You wanted the mansion. You wanted the social status. You wanted to be the senator's wife. You were perfectly willing to let your sister freeze on the street to keep your diamond rings." My mother slowly raised her head, wiping her tear-streaked face with shaking hands. "Alicia was going to give the baby away," Brenda sobbed, looking at Derek with pleading eyes. "She was going to leave the baby at a fire station anonymously. We had it all planned out. Nobody would have ever known. But Sasha found out. Sasha ruined the plan." I had stayed silent long enough, letting them dig their own graves, but hearing my mother try to twist the truth again made my blood boil. I stood up, holding Leo securely on my hip, and walked toward the center of the room. "Do not you dare blame me for ruining your sick little plan, Brenda," I said, my voice cutting through her sobs. "You were going to throw a newborn baby into a drop box just to avoid a scandal. You were going to throw away your own flesh and blood." When I found Alicia packing her bags to sneak off to the clinic, I begged her to stop. I told her I would take the baby. I told her I would raise him. Alicia glared at me through her tears, the familiar venom returning to her eyes, despite the fact that her life was entirely ruined. "And you ruined my life, Sasha." Alicia spat, her voice vicious and ugly. "You should have just let me get rid of it. If you had just kept your mouth shut, none of this would be happening. You always have to be the martyr, do you not? You always have to be the saint." Trey stepped forward, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle twitched in his cheek. He looked at Alicia with a level of disgust I had never seen from him before. "You are a monster," Alicia Trey said, his voice low and dangerous. "Sasha saved your son." She gave up her 20s. She dropped out of her university program. She worked 3 jobs just to keep a roof over his head. "And how did you repay her? You stood in her living room today and called her child a bastard. You called your own son a mistake." Derek rubbed his face with both hands, letting out a long, exhausted sigh. The absolute magnitude of the betrayal was finally setting in, settling deep into his bones. He looked at me, and then he looked at little Leo, who was resting his head on my shoulder, completely exhausted by the screaming. Derek had spent 5 years treating me like absolute garbage because he believed the lies his wife and her parents had fed him. He had barred me from family events, he had refused to let me near his house, and he had openly mocked me to his political friends. "I am looking at 3 sociopaths," Derek muttered, staring at my parents and his wife. "You 3 sat at my dinner table every Thanksgiving. You smiled in my campaign photos. You prayed with me at church. And for 5 years you all knew that the little boy living in a cramped apartment downtown was my wife's illegitimate child. You are all completely sick in the head." Vernon tried to stand up, his knees popping loudly in the quiet room. "Derek, please, we can fix this," Vernon pleaded, his voice desperate and pathetic. "We will issue a statement. We will say it was a closed adoption. We can spin this to make the family look charitable. The congregation will understand forgiveness. We can still save the campaign." The sheer audacity of my father's words left me completely speechless. Even now, standing in the wreckage of his shattered family, his only concern was public relations and saving face at the church. He truly believed that everything could be fixed with a few lies and a fake smile. Derek stared at Vernon for a long, terrible moment. Then he started to laugh. It was not a normal laugh. It was a dark, broken sound that filled the room with a chilling energy. "Save the campaign," Derek repeated, wiping a tear of absolute hysteria from his eye. "Vernon, my campaign is dead. My career is dead." Sasha just handed my entire financial history over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "I am going to federal prison for wire fraud and embezzlement. There is no campaign left to save." My parents gasped in unison, the realization of Derek's impending criminal charges suddenly rushing back to the forefront of their minds. In the chaos of the DNA reveal, they had momentarily forgotten that they were all sitting in the middle of a massive federal crime scene. The reality of their situation was finally crushing them from all sides. Their golden child was an exposed adulterer. Their perfect son-in-law was a desperate criminal. And the daughter they had thrown away was the billionaire holding the matches to their burning house. Alicia looked frantically from Derek to her parents, her mind racing to find any possible way out of the nightmare. But the walls had closed in completely. There were no more lies to tell. There were no more secrets to hide. The 5 years of toxic manipulation had finally caught up to them, and the absolute devastation was beautifully complete. But my parents were not the type of people to accept defeat gracefully. Even with the cold, hard scientific facts staring them directly in the face, they desperately clung to their delusions. Vernon shook his head violently, his face flushing a deep, angry red as he pointed a trembling finger at my brother. "That piece of paper means absolutely nothing," Vernon shouted, his voice echoing with a frantic, artificial authority. "You are a lawyer, Trey. You know people. You could have easily paid some corrupt technician at a laboratory to print out those fake results just to humiliate your sister and ruin this family. You have always been jealous of Alicia's success. You forged those documents to destroy her marriage and humiliate us in front of a powerful state senator." Brenda eagerly latched onto this ridiculous theory, nodding her head so hard her hair fell out of its pristine updo. "Yes," she cried out, stepping toward Derek with her hands clasped together in a pleading gesture. "Trey is manipulating the evidence, Derek. He is trying to trick you because he resents our family values. Those DNA tests are notoriously inaccurate anyway. You cannot throw away your marriage and your beautiful life over a piece of paper that Trey printed off the internet. We need to go to our own doctor. A Christian doctor who will tell us the real truth and clear Alicia's name completely." Derek just stared at them, his jaw tight, his eyes dark and empty. He looked completely exhausted, entirely drained by the relentless barrage of their pathetic lies. He did not even have the energy to argue with them anymore. He simply looked away, staring blankly at the shattered glass on the hardwood floor, processing the sheer absurdity of their denial. Alicia, seeing a tiny sliver of hope in her parents' desperate defense, slowly lifted her head from her knees. "Mom is right," Alicia whispered, wiping her mascara-stained cheeks with the back of her hand, leaving dark streaks across her pale skin. "Trey hates me. Sasha hates me. They planned this entire setup to get back at me because I have the life they always wanted. They are trying to frame me. Derek, please, you have to believe me. I am your wife. I would never do something so completely evil." I felt a deep surge of disgust listening to them desperately try to gaslight a man whose life they had already destroyed. I was about to speak up to shut down their pathetic lies once and for all, but I did not have to. Claire, who had been standing quietly near the entryway, observing the entire chaotic scene, finally decided she had heard enough. She walked slowly into the center of the living room, her silk robe flowing elegantly behind her. She held a sleek silver tablet in her hands. She did not look angry. She looked completely bored and entirely, utterly unimpressed by their pathetic attempts at deception. "You know," Vernon Clare began, her voice smooth and chillingly calm, "it is actually quite insulting that you think my husband would need to forge a document to prove what a terrible person your daughter is. Trey is a professional. He relies on irrefutable evidence. And because my family owns a massive portfolio of commercial real estate, including several high-end private medical facilities in the greater Atlanta area, I was able to help him secure something a little more visual than a piece of paper." My parents froze, their frantic excuses dying instantly in their throats. Alicia's eyes widened in fresh terror, staring at the silver tablet in Claire's hands as if it were a loaded weapon aimed directly at her chest. Claire tapped the screen of her tablet a few times, navigating through a secure digital file. 5 years ago, when Sasha suddenly announced she was pregnant, and Alicia miraculously returned from her luxury fitness retreat, looking much thinner. "I was very suspicious," Claire explained. Her icy blue eyes locked onto Alicia, pinning her to the floor. "So I made a few discreet phone calls. I asked the security directors at our private clinics to run a facial recognition scan on their archival footage, comparing it to photos of Alicia. It took them a few weeks to find a match, but they eventually did." Claire turned the tablet around so the bright screen was facing Derek. She tapped the play button. The high-definition video began to play clearly, showing the pristine lobby of a discreet, upscale private maternity clinic located 3 hours outside of Atlanta. The timestamp on the bottom corner of the video was dated 5 years ago, specifically 2 weeks before my parents threw me out into the snow. Derek stepped closer, his eyes glued to the screen. On the video, a young woman wearing large dark sunglasses and a heavy oversized winter coat walked nervously up to the reception desk. She pulled down her sunglasses to speak to the receptionist. The camera angle captured her face perfectly. It was Alicia. Her face was fuller, her expression was exhausted, and she was heavily, unmistakably pregnant. The audio from the security camera crackled to life, filling my quiet living room with the undeniable sound of my sister's voice from 5 years ago. "Hi, I have a scheduled appointment." The digital. Alicia said nervously, tapping her fingers on the reception desk. "The name is Amanda Smith. I am here for the induced labor procedure. Dr. Evans is expecting me." The receptionist on the video nodded, typing into her computer. "Yes, Miss Smith, we have you ready in a private suite. Please remember that as per your strict confidentiality agreement, we require payment in full today, and all records will be sealed immediately after the birth." Claire tapped the screen, pausing the video right on Alicia's pregnant profile. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute, crushing the very last breath of resistance out of my parents. The video was incredibly clear. The audio was perfectly crisp and the timeline matched exactly. There was no way to forge it, no way to deny it, and absolutely no way to explain it away as a misunderstanding. "There it is," Claire said softly, lowering the tablet. "Your perfect Christian daughter, checking into a private clinic under a fake name to secretly give birth to the son she later forced her younger sister to claim. It is a shame we do not have the footage of you, Vernon, driving her to the clinic. But the clinic financial records show that the cash payment of $40,000 was drawn directly from your personal church checking account." Vernon let out a sharp gasp, clutching his chest as he stumbled backward, collapsing heavily onto the sofa next to his weeping wife. He looked completely broken, his entire world shattering around him. The grand illusion he had spent his entire life building was reduced to a humiliating digital video and a stolen bank transfer. Derek stood perfectly still, staring at the frozen image of his pregnant wife on the tablet screen. His hands were clenched so tightly at his sides that his knuckles were stark white. The lies, the manipulation, the extortion, and the sheer cruelty of the family he had married into washed over him in a sickening wave. He slowly turned his head away from the tablet and looked down at Alicia, who was curled up on the floor, completely defeated, entirely stripped of her fake, glamorous armor. There was no more screaming. There were no more threats. The undeniable proof had done its job, entirely neutralizing the villains in my living room. The truth was finally standing tall in the light, and they had absolutely nowhere left to hide. The silence that followed Claire's brutal presentation of the security footage was so profound, it felt like the oxygen had been completely sucked out of the room. Derek stood like a statue, staring down at the woman he had married, the woman he had built his entire public life around. Alicia was still crumpled on the floor, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as the reality of her complete destruction finally settled over her. The golden child was dead, and in her place was just a pathetic liar who had run out of places to hide. Then the storm finally broke. Derek let out a sound that I had never heard a human being make before. It was a raw, visceral roar of absolute betrayal and unchecked rage that seemed to shake the very foundations of my house. He kicked the glass coffee table with such violent force that it slid across the imported rug and crashed into the side of the sofa right next to where my parents were cowering. Vernon and Brenda flinched, pulling their legs up and crying out in fear, but Derek did not even look at them. His entire focus, his pure, unfiltered hatred, was locked completely onto his wife. "You disgusting, lying hypocrite!" Derek screamed, his voice tearing through the air and making little Leo bury his face deeper into my neck. "You stood beside me at the altar in front of hundreds of people, in front of your own church, and you promised me absolute loyalty. You let me believe that you were a pure, untouched Christian woman who was saving herself for marriage while you were secretly carrying the bastard child of some sweaty gym trainer. You made me banish your own sister. You made me hate her. You made me look like an absolute fool in front of my peers and my constituents. Alicia crawled forward on her hands and knees, her expensive white designer suit dragging across the floor, picking up dust and tiny shards of broken glass from the spilled water. She reached out with trembling hands, grabbing onto the pant leg of Derek's tailored suit. "Please, Derek," she sobbed, looking up at him with a face that was completely ruined by running mascara and snot. It meant nothing. It was a moment of weakness. "I love you. I built my whole life around you. You cannot throw me away like this. We are a team. We are the perfect couple. Think of our image. Think of the campaign." Derek looked down at her hands gripping his pants, and his face contorted in absolute disgust. He yanked his leg back so violently that Alicia fell flat onto her stomach on the hardwood floor. "Do not ever touch me again," he hissed, his voice dropping into a deadly venomous whisper. "There is no team, Alicia. There is no campaign. You and your insane parents just made sure that I am going to federal prison for wire fraud and embezzlement to cover the debts of a church that is run by a fake pastor and a cheating wife. My image is completely destroyed, and it is entirely your fault." My mother Brenda pushed herself up from the sofa, holding her hands out in a desperate pleading gesture. "Derek, son, you have to calm down," she cried, her voice cracking with panic. "You cannot make rash decisions in a moment of anger. Marriage is a sacred bond. The Bible says we must forgive those who trespass against us. We can go to counseling. We can pray on this. Alicia is still your wife." "Shut your mouth!" Brenda Derek roared, turning his terrifying gaze onto my mother. "You are the architect of this entire nightmare. You helped her hide the pregnancy. You paid the private clinic with stolen church money. You threw your other daughter into the freezing cold to protect this cheating monster. You do not get to quote the Bible to me, you absolute hypocrite. You and Vernon are going to lose everything, and I am going to make sure the entire community knows exactly what you did before the feds put you in handcuffs." Derek reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out his cell phone. His hands were shaking with adrenaline, but his movements were incredibly precise and deliberate. He unlocked the screen and swiped through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. He hit the call button and put the phone on speaker, holding it out in the middle of the room so every single person could hear exactly what was about to happen. The phone rang twice before a deep professional voice answered on the other end. "This is Richard Harrison," the voice said. "Richard, it is Derek," he said, his voice suddenly cold and brutally professional. "I need you to drop whatever you are doing right now and draft a divorce petition. I want it filed with the court before the end of the day." Alicia let out a blood-curdling scream, scrambling back up to her knees. "No, Derek, no, please do not do this," she shrieked, reaching for the phone, but Trey stepped forward and easily blocked her path, pushing her back down to the floor. Richard sounded surprised on the other end of the line. "Derek, are you sure about this?" he asked. "We are right in the middle of the election cycle. A divorce filing right now is going to be a massive public relations nightmare." "There is no election cycle anymore," Richard Derek replied, his eyes locked dead onto Alicia's weeping face. "I am invoking the infidelity clause in our prenuptial agreement. Section 4, paragraph B. She violated the moral turpitude clause. I have absolute undeniable proof of an affair that resulted in an illegitimate pregnancy just weeks before our wedding day. She hid the child and forced her sister to take the blame. I have certified medical DNA tests, and I have high-definition security camera footage of her checking into a private maternity clinic under a fake name to give birth to another man's child." The line was completely silent for a long moment as the high-powered lawyer processed the sheer magnitude of the scandal. "Understood, Derek." Richard finally said, his tone shifting into purely legal strategy. "If you have hard proof of a premarital affair and a hidden child that directly violates the moral turpitude and fraud clauses of the prenup, she gets nothing, no alimony, no division of the estate, and no claim to the Buckhead mansion. I will have the papers drafted and ready for your signature within the hour. I will also hire a private security firm to supervise her immediate eviction from the property. Derek ended the call and let the phone drop to his side. He looked down at Alicia, who was now lying completely flat on the floor, hyperventilating, her entire body shaking with violent, uncontrollable sobs. The grand illusion she had spent her entire life desperately maintaining had just been legally dismantled in less than 2 minutes. She was no longer the powerful wife of a state senator. She was no longer the golden child of the perfect Christian family. She was completely and utterly penniless. "You have exactly 1 hour to get your fake designer clothes out of my house," Alicia Derek said, his voice completely devoid of any emotion. "The security guards will escort you off the premises. You will not take the cars, you will not take the jewelry, and you will not take a single dime from the joint accounts. You are going to walk out of my life with exactly what you brought into it, which is absolutely nothing but lies." Derek turned his back on her, refusing to look at the wreckage of his marriage for even 1 second longer. He looked at Vernon and Brenda, who were holding on to each other on the sofa, looking like two terrified children who had just realized the monsters were actually real. "Enjoy your ruined lives, you disgusting people," Derek spat. He then turned his attention back to me, and for the first time since he walked into my house, the aggressive arrogance was completely gone from his face. He was just a broken, desperate man facing federal prison who had completely run out of options. Derek stepped right over Alicia's sobbing body, as if she were nothing more than a discarded piece of trash on the floor. He walked slowly toward my armchair, his expensive leather shoes crunching over the shards of broken glass. He did not look back at the woman he had just vowed to divorce. He did not look at the parents he had just verbally destroyed. His eyes were locked entirely on me with a terrifying, frantic desperation. The polished state senator was completely gone, and what was left was a terrified man standing on the edge of a massive cliff, staring down into the dark abyss of federal prison. He wiped the heavy sweat from his forehead with the back of his trembling hand, smudging his expensive cologne. Sasha Derek began, his voice completely stripped of its former booming political authority. It was a weak, pathetic sound. "Sasha, we need to separate the personal from the professional right now. You have your revenge. You exposed Alicia and you ruined her life. You humiliated Vernon and Brenda. You won the family war. You proved to everyone that they are monsters and you are the successful one. I will back you up on everything. I will tell the church exactly what they did to you. I will publicly ruin them for you if that is what you want. But we cannot let this family drama destroy a perfectly viable business transaction." Trey let out a harsh scoff from across the room, crossing his arms over his chest. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Derek Trey asked, his voice filled with absolute disbelief. "You just found out your entire life is a lie constructed by my parents, and you are still trying to pitch a business deal to the sister they abused." Derek ignored Trey entirely. He took another step closer to me, leaning forward and clasping his hands together in a begging gesture. "Please, Sasha," he pleaded, his voice cracking with absolute panic. "You have the dossier. You know exactly how bad my financial situation is. If those federal agents look into my PAC accounts tomorrow morning, they are going to find the missing funds. They will issue arrest warrants before noon. My political career will be over, but it is not just about the career anymore. They will lock me up in a federal penitentiary for the next decade. I will lose my freedom. I will lose absolutely everything." I just sat there holding my son, listening to this man completely abandon his pride and his humanity for a chance at survival. He was offering to destroy his own in-laws just to save his own skin. It was a masterful display of pure narcissism. "You have $5 million sitting in your venture capital funds." Derek continued, speaking faster and faster as the panic consumed him. "You can wire that money into the blind trust right now. If you transfer the funds today, I can balance the ledgers before the state auditors or the feds freeze my accounts. I can replace the money I took from the church building fund. I can cover the offshore transfers. I can make the entire paper trail disappear overnight. Nobody has to go to jail, Sasha. My father, Vernon, looked up from the sofa, his eyes wide with a sudden, desperate spark of hope. He grabbed my mother's arm, shaking it. Brenda, did you hear that? Vernon whispered loudly, his voice trembling with renewed desperation. If Sasha gives him the money, he can put the church funds back. The congregation will never have to know the money was missing. We can still save the church expansion project. Sasha, you have to do this for the church. You cannot let the house of God fall into bankruptcy. The absolute sheer audacity of my father trying to use the church to guilt me into funding a criminal cover-up was almost physically nauseating. Claire let out a sound of pure disgust, turning her face away from my parents, as if looking at them was making her sick. Derek fell to his knees right there on the edge of my imported rug. The sharp pieces of broken glass dug into the expensive fabric of his suit pants, but he did not even seem to feel the pain. He looked up at me with tears streaming down his face. Sasha, I am begging you, he cried, his voice echoing miserably in the large room. I will pay you back every single penny with whatever interest rate you want. I will sign over my state pension. I will give you total control over my political action committee. You will have a state senator in your pocket. You can dictate policy. You can secure state contracts for your firm. Just please wire the money right now. Do not let me go to prison because of what your crazy sister did to me. I am a victim in this too, Sasha. She lied to me just like they lied to you. We are both victims of their toxic manipulation. He reached out with a shaking hand as if he wanted to touch my knee, but he stopped himself, hovering his hand in the air. Please, he whispered one final time, the word dragging out into a pathetic, miserable sob. Just authorize the loan. Save my life. I let his pathetic words hang in the air for a very long time. The room was completely silent, except for the sound of Derek's ragged breathing and the quiet sniffling of my mother on the sofa. I gently stroked Leo's back, feeling my son's breathing return to a calm, steady rhythm against my collarbone. He was safe. He was loved. And the people who had tried to destroy him were currently writhing on the floor at my feet. I slowly lifted my head and looked down at the man kneeling before me. I did not feel angry anymore. The burning rage that had fueled me for the last 5 years had completely evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a cold, hollow void. I looked at Derek and I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the cold, calculated smile of a predator watching a trapped animal finally realize there is absolutely no way out of the cage. Derek, I said, my voice perfectly level and terrifyingly calm. You still do not understand what is happening here, do you? You are still functioning under the delusion that you walked into a negotiation today. Derek blinked, his tears stopping as a new wave of confusion and dread washed over his face. What do you mean? He stammered, his hands dropping to his sides. You have the money. You own the firm. You can authorize the loan. I reached over to the glass coffee table and picked up the navy blue folder once again. I did not open it. I just held it in my hand, feeling the heavy weight of his absolute destruction resting in my palm. I am a venture capitalist, Derek, I explained slowly, making sure he absorbed every single word. My firm Apex Ventures specializes in high-risk acquisitions and distressed asset management. We do not give out charity loans to failing politicians to help them cover up federal crimes. We identify sinking ships, we buy their debt for pennies on the dollar, and then we completely liquidate their assets for a massive profit. Derek's face went completely blank. His political brain was struggling to process the financial terminology coming out of my mouth. When your major political donors started abandoning you 3 months ago because they smelled the corruption, you panicked. I continued, my voice echoing clearly in the silent room. You took out massive commercial loans to keep your campaign afloat and to cover your personal gambling debts. You used the church expansion land as collateral. You used your Buckhead mansion as collateral. You borrowed millions of dollars from high-interest private lenders thinking you could just pay it all back after you won the re-election. Vernon let out a strangled gasp from the sofa, realizing exactly where this was going. The church land. Vernon whispered, his face turning gray. You leveraged the church land. I did not take my eyes off Derek. When the rumors of your federal investigation started leaking last week, those private lenders panicked, I said, leaning forward slightly in my armchair. They wanted to offload your toxic debt before the feds froze your assets. So my firm stepped in. Apex Ventures purchased every single one of your commercial loans, Derek. We bought the mortgage on your house. We bought the lien on the church property. We bought the campaign debts. Derek stopped breathing. He stared at me, his eyes wide and unblinking, his mouth hanging open in silent horror. I am not here to give you a $5 million loan, Derek. I whispered the words, slicing through the air like a surgical scalpel. You came here today hoping to pitch a rescue plan to a CEO named Alexander. But I am not your potential investor. I am your primary creditor. I own your debt. I own your house. And I own the church land. No, Derek choked out, shaking his head frantically. No, you cannot do that. We had an agreement with the lenders. We had an extension until the end of the month. You had an extension contingent on maintaining your political standing. I corrected him, tapping the blue folder against my knee. But the morals clause in those loan agreements allows the primary creditor to immediately call in the full balance if the borrower is placed under federal investigation for fraud. My legal team activated that clause yesterday afternoon. The deadline for the balloon payment on all of your consolidated loans was midnight last night. The absolute silence in the room was deafening. Even Alicia had stopped crying, staring up at me from the floor with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. You defaulted 12 hours ago, Derek, I said, delivering the final devastating blow. The deadline has already passed. The foreclosure notices were officially filed with the state court at exactly 8 o'clock this morning. I already sent the federal agents your financial records to ensure they freeze whatever liquid cash you have left. Tomorrow morning, the Federal Bureau of Investigation will be at your office to arrest you for wire fraud. And while they are putting you in handcuffs, the bank representatives will be at your Buckhead mansion to change the locks and seize your property. Derek slowly collapsed backwards, sitting heavily on his heels amidst the broken glass. His hands fell limply into his lap. He was completely annihilated. There was no political spin that could save him. There was no hidden account he could tap into. The woman he had treated like garbage for 5 years had quietly purchased his entire life and then legally burned it to the ground while he was sleeping. My father let out a loud, agonizing wail, burying his face in the sofa cushions as he realized his precious church, the symbol of his power and his status, was gone forever. My mother simply stared blankly at the wall, her mind completely broken by the sheer magnitude of the karma that had just crushed her family. They came to my house expecting to demand money from a stranger to save their fake, perfect lives. Instead, they walked directly into an ambush carefully orchestrated by the daughter they threw away. They had absolutely nothing left. No money, no power, no reputation, and no future. The sweet revenge was finally complete. Derek did not say another word. His mouth opened and closed silently like a fish suffocating on dry land. The reality of the Federal Bureau of Investigation showing up at his door the next morning had completely shattered his mind. He slowly pushed himself up from the floor, his expensive suit pants sliced and ruined by the broken glass scattered across the rug. He stumbled backward away from me, away from his sobbing wife, away from the absolute wreckage of his carefully constructed life. He turned around and began to run. He did not walk, he ran. His leather shoes slipped frantically on the polished marble floors of the grand foyer, but he caught his balance and sprinted toward the heavy wooden front doors. He ripped the door open and sprinted out into the warm Georgia air, leaving the door wide open behind him. We could hear the panicked crunch of gravel as he scrambled into his luxury car. The engine roared to life, tires squealing violently against the stones as he sped away down the long driveway, desperately trying to outrun a storm that had already destroyed him. The sound of his car fading into the distance left a hollow, agonizing silence in my living room. The golden child and the perfect Christian parents were completely alone now, stranded in the fortress of the daughter they had discarded. Alicia slowly pushed herself up to her knees. Her face was a swollen red mess. Her perfect blonde hair was tangled and wild, sticking to her wet cheeks. She looked around the room, her eyes darting frantically, as if she was expecting someone to jump out and tell her this was all a terrible nightmare. But there was no one left to save her. Her husband was gone. Her money was gone. Her status was gone. The fake reality she had spent 5 years enjoying was ripped away in an instant. She looked up at me, and for the first time in my entire life, I saw genuine absolute fear in my older sister's eyes. Sasha, Alicia whispered, her voice raw and scratching painfully against her throat. Sasha, please, you cannot do this to me. I have nowhere to go. Derek is going to lock me out of the house. My high society friends will not take me in when they hear about the scandal. They will block my number. I have no money in my own name. I have nothing. Please, Sasha, I am your sister. We share the same blood. You cannot let me sleep on the street. I will do whatever you want. I will clean this house. I will apologize to everyone. Just do not throw me out. My mother suddenly slid off the sofa, hitting the floor right next to Alicia. She crawled across the imported rug, completely ignoring the sharp glass cutting into her own bare knees. She reached out with her trembling hands, trying to grab the hem of my cashmere sweater. Sasha, my beautiful baby girl. My mother wailed, tears pouring down her face in thick, heavy streams. We are so incredibly sorry. We were blind. We were foolish and arrogant, and we let the devil into our hearts. Please forgive us. God tells us to forgive those who wrong us. You have this massive house. You have so many empty bedrooms. Please let us stay here. The bank is going to take our home. The congregation will cast us out when they hear about the money. We will have absolutely nothing to our names. Please, Sasha, you have to protect your family. My father Vernon was the last to break. The proud, booming patriarch who had ruled our family with an iron fist of toxic righteousness slowly slipped off the edge of the sofa and dropped heavily to his knees. He bowed his head, staring at the floor, his shoulders shaking with the crushing weight of his absolute ruin. Sasha, he said, his voice completely broken, stripped of every ounce of pride he had ever possessed. We have nowhere else to turn. We are begging you. Have mercy on us. Give us shelter. Do not abandon your flesh and blood in our darkest hour. I was wrong. I was a terrible father. Please just give us a chance to make it right. I looked down at the three of them kneeling on the floor, surrounded by broken glass and spilled water. They were begging for the exact same things I had begged for 5 years ago. Mercy, shelter, love. I remembered the biting cold of that January night. I remembered the sleet soaking through my thin shirt, the violent shivering that racked my pregnant body, the terrifying realization that I was completely alone in the freezing world. I remembered standing on their pristine front porch, knocking on the heavy wooden door, screaming for my mother, screaming for my father, screaming for my sister to just open the door and let me inside. And I remembered the absolute silence that answered me. I held Leo a little tighter against my chest, feeling the steady, calm beat of his heart. I looked at Trey, who was standing tall and protective nearby, ready to defend me. I looked at Claire, who was watching my parents with cold, indifferent eyes, holding her tablet like a shield. I had built a beautiful life out of the ashes they left me in. I had survived the freezing cold, and I had become the fire. I did not need their apologies now that they had nothing left to offer. I looked down at my mother, who was still reaching her bloody hands toward my sweater. I stepped back, pulling myself completely out of her reach. "You want mercy, Brenda?" I asked, my voice quiet, but echoing with an icy finality. "You want shelter, Vernon. You want sisterhood, Alicia. You want me to save you from the storm you created yourself." I looked at each of them individually, making sure they saw the absolute emptiness in my eyes. I took a deep breath, letting the last remaining chains of my toxic childhood fall away, completely dropping onto the floor like the broken glass. "You are no family of mine," I said, repeating the exact words my father had shouted at me 5 years ago. "Get out!" My mother let out a devastating scream of pure agony, collapsing flat onto the floor and beating her fists against the wood. Alicia sobbed hysterically, pulling at her own hair and rocking back and forth. My father just squeezed his eyes shut, accepting his terrible fate. Trey did not hesitate. He stepped forward, grabbing Vernon by the collar of his expensive suit and pulling him roughly to his feet. Claire walked over and grabbed Alicia by the arm, pulling her up with surprising strength for a woman of her size. "It is time to leave," Trey commanded, his voice, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "Walk out that door right now, or I will have the private security detail drag you off the property by your hair." They did not fight back. The fight was completely drained out of their bodies. Trey and Claire marched them out of the living room, down the long, elegant hallway, and out the front doors. I stood by the massive front window and watched as my parents and my sister stumbled blindly down my long gravel driveway, crying and shivering in the bright morning air, with absolutely nowhere to go. The heavy iron gates of my estate slowly closed behind them, locking them out of my life forever. The aftermath of that Sunday morning was swift and completely merciless, just like the justice they deserved. The very next day, just as I had promised, the Federal Bureau of Investigation raided Derek's political offices downtown and his massive Buckhead mansion. It was broadcast live on every single local news station in Atlanta. We watched the television in my kitchen as federal agents carried out heavy boxes of financial records, computer servers, and hard drives. Finally, they let out the once powerful state senator in silver handcuffs. Derek looked pale and completely terrified. His political career officially dead. His entire life reduced to a federal inmate number. He was denied bail at his hearing because the judge considered him a massive flight risk given the offshore accounts he had tried to hide. He was sent straight to a federal holding cell to await a trial he was guaranteed to lose. Alicia was officially escorted off the property by the bank representatives later that same afternoon. A local news helicopter caught the pathetic footage of her sitting on the curb outside her exclusive gated community. She had nothing but a single designer suitcase and the clothes on her back, sobbing uncontrollably as the locks were changed on her precious mansion. Her high society friends completely abandoned her overnight. They blocked her phone number, unfollowed her social media accounts, and refused to be associated with the massive criminal scandal. She was forced to move into a cheap, dingy motel on the outskirts of the city. She desperately tried to find a lawyer who would represent her in the divorce proceedings, but nobody would take her case without a massive cash retainer she could no longer afford. She was utterly alone. The devastation extended completely to my parents, destroying the only thing they truly cared about, which was their public image. When the news broke about the embezzled church funds, the congregation erupted in absolute outrage. A special emergency council was immediately convened at the church. Vernon was officially stripped of his pastoral title and completely excommunicated from the church he had spent his entire life building. Brenda was aggressively shunned by all the wealthy church ladies she used to gossip with. The bank foreclosed on the church expansion land and immediately seized my parents' house to cover the remaining debt. They were forced to pack whatever meager belongings they could carry and move into a tiny, run-down apartment in a dangerous neighborhood miles away from their comfortable suburban life. Their perfect Christian reputation was entirely replaced by public disgrace and profound, endless humiliation. They had nothing but each other and the suffocating realization that they had destroyed their own lives by trying to destroy mine. But while their world was burning to the ground, my world was finally bathed in warm, beautiful sunlight. 6 months later, the air in Atlanta was thick with the sweet smell of summer. I was standing on the expansive wooden deck of my backyard, overlooking the pristine, heated swimming pool and the lush green gardens of my private estate. The grill was fired up, and the mouth-watering smell of barbecue ribs, sweet corn, and roasted vegetables filled the air. Loud, joyful music was playing from the outdoor patio speakers, blending perfectly with the sound of genuine, happy laughter. Trey was standing by the grill wearing a ridiculous oversized chef apron, flipping burgers and playfully arguing with Claire about the correct way to season the meat. Claire was laughing loudly, her head thrown back, a cold iced drink in her hand, looking completely relaxed and blissfully happy. And running around the manicured lawn chasing a bright yellow soccer ball was my beautiful son Leo. His laughter echoed across the yard, pure and completely unburdened by the toxic history of the family he would never have to know. He was safe. He was thriving. He was unconditionally loved by the people who actually mattered. I stood at the edge of the deck, watching them holding a glass of sweet iced tea in my hand. The deep, agonizing wounds that my parents and sister had inflicted on me for so many years were finally healed. The heavy, crushing weight I had carried since childhood was entirely gone, lifted from my shoulders permanently. I took a deep breath of the warm summer air, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over my soul. People often say that blood is thicker than water. They use that phrase to manipulate you, to force you to endure toxic behavior, to make you feel guilty for walking away from people who share your DNA. But I learned the hard way that blood means absolutely nothing when it is used as a weapon against you. True family is not defined by biology. It is not defined by who was in the delivery room or whose name is written on a birth certificate. True family is defined by loyalty. It is defined by the people who answer the phone at 2 in the morning when you are crying in the freezing cold. It is defined by the people who stand between you and the monsters who want to tear you down. Family is the people who choose you every single day, not because they are legally or morally obligated to, but because they genuinely love the person you are. Trey and Claire were my family. Leo was my family. We had built our own beautiful circle forged in the fires of survival and bound together by absolute unwavering support. I had to lose the family I was born into, so I could finally discover the family I truly deserved. The journey was terrifying. The pain was immense, but the destination was worth every single tear I shed. I claimed my power, I protected my son, and I built an empire out of the heavy stones they threw at me. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members who demanded your loyalty but offered you nothing but pain in return? How did you find the strength to choose yourself and build your own chosen family? I would love to hear your stories of survival and triumph in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel to hear more stories of resilience and sweet justice. Share this video with someone who might be struggling with a toxic family right now. They need to know that it is okay to walk away. They need to know that they are never alone. Thank you so much for joining me today. And always remember that you have the power to rewrite your own story and surround yourself with people who truly celebrate your light.